Hi everyone, this is Stephanie at Hightower Stitching with today's tutorial. It's number 246. It's from McCall's Quilting, March, April 2023, page 61, and it was called Matchstick Stars. Here's a picture. I want to tell you a lot about these. It's made with almost all 2.5-inch strips. You can do it scrappy. You can have the background be cream or white. It makes a 24-inch block. That's the biggest one I think I've ever made. It's nice if you have a place where you can set your blocks out to look at them before you sew them together, because you can turn the star different ways. You'll see that. Excuse me. The cream or white background takes 3 1/4 yards. Backing, if you make it a 9-inch square, a 9 block square, it's going to take 7 5/8 yards. That makes pretty big. And so I just pulled mine down to making 4 blocks, 2x2, and you'll see that. This is a handsome quilt when you get it done. And you can, like I said, you can do it scrappy. Today what I'm going to do is show you a sample and then my 4-block piece that I'm working on. And the purpose of today is to do a tutorial to setting you up for success in this project. And I want to show you a really handsome block that they made. And this actually has a black with either an orange or a gold in it. And it really is really pretty. Using any 2.5-inch strips that you already have from a jelly roll, or even cutting down a 10-inch cake layer, makes it easy. But you can see in this diagram how many pieces there are. And I'm going to show you in a minute that there are 6. I divided it up into 6 parts to manage it. And this was 1, 2, 3. I counted this little side over here as 4. Then this big side is 5, and this is 6. And I really, really liked it. So let me show you the sample. You're going to see a little jiggling as I try to capture this 24-inch square. You can see all of the 2.5-inch strips, and that they're different size, and that the cream parts are not the same size either. And that's what I'm going to show you, the way that I did it. And when I got ready to do my 4-block piece, turned out really well. And before I go on, this one I've already gotten quilted. And it was a big block, but it was really fun when I got ready to quilt it, whether you do it by hand or with your machine. And I just started off with, I said, what am I going to do? Am I going to do the same thing everywhere? And I said, no, I think I've got different strips, so I'm going to do it differently. So here I started with the half hearts, and I liked that. And then I did the strips with the flowers going down that, and I really like that. It's the first time I've ever done that. I found a heart template, and I made hearts going down where the line goes up into the star on each side, and that's what makes your star right in there. And then on the back, I just had a cream backing, and that was so much fun when I turned it over and I could see how it looked. The next one that I'm working on, the big one, I didn't use the cream because I actually used white as my trims. And this is what I started with, because I wanted to see what made up this this big square. And I'll show you the sections that I did. And I've got section 1, section 2, and then they're going to hook together. I've got section 3. There is one 4.5-inch square in there. and then there is another little section on the end. And if you'll look, if you can see closely, I went and did one thing beyond what they did by putting in the exact amount. This was a 12.5-inch strip right here. This was a 14.5-inch strip. And then let me tell you, this was 5. Excuse me. And then there was a 6. It's a small section, and it's right there. And I tell you, once I got this done, this was my guide sheet. This was my guide sheet. And so if you can reconstruct that, you're going to be set to go. Now, we'll tell you, you're going to have some squares where you draw the diagonal, and they're going to be right where the point is that goes into make the star. And I let myself know which ones they were because I circled them with blue. And so here's one of the blues, and the square is added on the end of there, and you sew the diagonal that you've already drawn, and then you cut off. You're going to cut off the extra and then flip the half of that square back out, and you're going to make that nice point there that appears in the quilt. Okay, let's go back and look at this. So here is one, and it was a total length, and I put that square with a diagonal on it and laid it on top, sewed the diagonal, cut this outside part off, left a 1/4 inch of a seam, and then flipped the other part back out. And it's so simple. You just have to remember to do it. And that's why I did, there's 2, 4, 6, 8. There are 4 sets of those. And I show myself that in blue when I get ready to do my setup. And then if you'll look, you can see that I've got some orange. Well, every section that's orange is the background color, whether it's cream or white. And I know this is a lot, but it's going to help you if you do this block because it ends up to be a lot of fun. All right, so I had my plan, and then I said, okay, now what am I going to do with it? And so I pulled out my board that's got I use batting on it, or whatever you have for a setup. And that's how I set it up. Then that first one you were looking at, I was just looking at pieces of 2.5 or something I could make into 2.5-inch wide strips. And so I just made my colors work as I did it. Well, then this big one that I decided I wanted to make it red, white, and blue. I wanted to have those colors in it. And so I cut the colors that I liked, plus some cream strips, 2.5 inches wide. And then I started playing with arranging those, and I'd arrange them on here. So when I looked at this first one, it said I needed a cream or white 2.5 by 12.5. And I actually have this one would be turned like this, just because that's the way I set it up. Then the next one was a 12.5 inch of a solid, and so I did this solid blue. Then the next one was 6.5, but it had the cream at the bottom, and that was 6.5 inches. And so I set that part up, and then I would take and I would set up my other section next. I'd set up this one and that one, and then I went back and I sewed these together, and then I sewed these sections together and pressed them, and then these were ready to hook to each other. And if you can skip back to that beginning, or let me see where the magazine went. Like for that first part, you can see, except I just had mine turned so I could see it a little differently, but it's the same thing that you see. And like I said, the only other thing, one thing that was different was that 4.5-inch square, because that's the center of your star. And besides your 4.5-inch square, you're going to need at least the 8 2.5-inch squares that you draw your diagonal in to make the point pointing to the star. You're going to have some plain 2.5-inch squares that are added on for your background, and also some 1.5-inch squares. But everything is 2.5 inches wide, except for that 1 4-inch square. So that being said, I wanted to show you what I did, that this might help you in that little piece of paper, okay? This is just like an add-on for hopefully for success. There are generally, the top 2 panels have 6 rows. All right, and so here's an enlarged one for you. This is section 1. Everything's 2.5 inches wide. 12.5 inches, 12.5 inches. The C's are the cream or the white that you use, like that piece. And then the other piece is always your print that you use. All right, so that was part 1. All right, then here's part 2. Get it so you can see it. Okay, and if you'll notice, you'll see where I have the green, and it says you're going to be using a 2.5-inch square on top of your 12.5-inch length so that it will look like this. And for this one, I stitched from the outside down. I'm going to cut this part off, and this will come back, and it will make your point that fits in there. They're not the same angle, but that's the idea. Okay, and then everything else is the same. C is a cream, and anything that's not a C is your prints that you use. So that was section 1, and it's got 6 rows. Section 2, and it's got 6 rows. Then you get a nice little break. And you've got section 3 and section 4. I probably could have called it just 3, but I'm going to show you the first part, which is 3. And then here again, everything's set up the same. These are where you're going to have your half triangles. Here's where you're going to have one of those 2.5-inch plain cream backs. There's your 4.5-inch square. It's going to go in the center. And then here is section 4. You've got a 6.5-inch regular, 4.5-inch regular, and then a 2.5-inch square. And then just a reminder that the greens are 2.5-inch squares that you've made a diagonal in. All right, and then you sew these 3 parts together, press them, and then I went and sewed them back to the first part. Okay, number 5. I'm really glad this turned out so clear. All right, this one is going to have 9 rows. Starting from 1 over to 9. You're going to have the 2 points that go into the star. Everything's the same. Excuse me. C's are always your 1.5 cream, or your creams are your whites. And if there's nothing in there, then it's your solid, a print or a solid that you want to use. And that would make 5. And these are going to be short because this section's just 8.5 inches, where the other was 12.5. And then the last part, 6, you're going to have your bars running up and down, but you're going to have 1 bar running across the top. And so these would be your creams. These are going to be your prints or solids. Then you're going to have a piece 5.5 inches long, and then a little 1.5, one of those little short ones we did. You sew this one together, and then it's attached to number 5. And here is my red, white, and blue. I'm going to call it Bars and Star. And I had a lot of fun with it. And every time you make your square, you don't have to put the same color in the same spot. And that's what makes it so attractive. And once you get it done and you've got, say you've got your 4 blocks or you've got your 9, then you take and you can turn it any way that you like it. If you look back at the beginning, or I'll show you the magazine again, that'd be a good idea. Now, in the middle, it's a 2.5 inch strip. You can see I've got that pinned, and across, that's for your sashing. And then for the outside border, they use just a 1.5 inch strip. So all of those things can be adjusted. And so it would have started with 2 blocks apart for 48 inches, and then you add those pieces as trim, and you're getting up to 51 inches by 51 inches. And it's really fun to go looking for backing, and I just love this backing. It's dark, where the other one I did was light, but I think it's going to make it easier for me to choose the thread that I want to use when I get ready to quilt this. And I wanted to go back to the book for a minute so that you can see how many, this was a really scrappy one, and that the stars, because the blocks are turned different ways, you get a really neat looking pattern. And like I said, this is a really handsome quilt. My purpose today was just to set you up, hopefully for success, for doing a project with straight strips, 2.5 inch strips, and any colors that you'd like to do with them. I can't wait. Now I can get started on doing my quilting on the other quilt and have a reveal for that later. This is Stephanie at Hightower Stitching. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you'll try this project, or it gives you an idea of something that you'd like to make. Remember, this makes a 24 inch block. I'll try to, if I've forgotten anything, I'll write it in the description. Thank you.